This is GovExec Daily, where we bring you the federal stories that really matter. It's May 4th, 2021. I'm Ross John Fortuné. In setting an agenda since inauguration, President Joe Biden and his administration have repeated that they came into office with a series of crises to solve. The novel coronavirus pandemic has been the main one, but throughout government, rebuilding the morale of the civil service was also an issue with which the administration would have to deal. In February, Biden named Pam Coleman, a veteran of government personnel at the state and federal levels, to be a czar within the Office of Management and Budget on issues related to the federal workforce and agency performance. At Government Executive Media Group's The New Agenda event in March, Coleman spoke about the workforce morale problems the administration inherited when it came into office.
I'm well aware that the task before us is no small one. In my less than 1 month here, I've come to learn anecdotally and quantitatively just how systematically the federal workforce has been damaged, disrespected, and demoralized over the last few years. Each week, we seem to uncover even more damage.
Biden will have to juggle a host of other crises as his administration tries to rebuild the civil service and the public's confidence in it. But as our guest today has written, there's no solution to any of the problems without quickly putting together a strategy for strengthening the federal workforce, because the workforce is the way for government to get any of these things done. Dr. Donald F. Kettl is a professor in the Lyndon B. Johnson School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas at Austin and a GovExec contributor. He's authored many books, including Escaping Jurassic Government, How to Recover America's Lost Commitment to Competence and The Politics of the Administrative Process. His latest piece on our site is headlined, Biden Needs a Strategy for Strengthening the Federal Workforce. After a short break, he'll join me to talk about the executive order, federal expertise, and civil service reform. We'll talk about that next on GovExec Daily, sponsored by Salesforce.
We live in an always-on world that creates demands for better experiences and interactions with government at all levels. For the public sector to best deliver on its mission, agencies and their employees need IT systems that provide analytical insights to drive decisions, improve work process effectiveness, and provide the best experience for their constituents. With Salesforce, you can rapidly transform the way you deliver government services through capabilities, solutions, and products that flex and scale to meet every need. Learn more about how Salesforce can help your agency adopt the capabilities you need to improve mission impact at salesforce.com/government.
The Biden administration often claims that it inherited a series of policy crises when it came into office this last January. Less prominent than the economic and public health crises involving COVID-19, for example, are the crises in the civil service. Biden's bedrock task, as our guest today has written, is to strengthen the civil service to tackle the policy problems facing the administration. Dr. Donald F. Kettl is a professor in the Lyndon B. Johnson School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas at Austin and a GovExec contributor. He's authored many books, including Escaping Jurassic Government, How to Recover America's Lost Commitment to Competence and the Politics of the Administrative Process. His most recent post on our site is headlined, Biden Needs a Strategy for Strengthening the Federal Workforce. He joins me now to discuss how the administration can support the civil service. Welcome back to the program.
It's so great to be with you there, Ross.
It's Public Service Recognition Week. So how do you think Joe Biden so far in his few months in office, how is he connected with the members of the civil service?
So far, at least, he's certainly recognized the civil service as a way of trying to celebrate the work that civil servants have done. And there have been a couple things in particular that are worth noting, I think. The first is that within a few days of taking office, he sent out an executive order taking back the Schedule F executive order that the Trump team had laid out in the last month of their administration. And that's incredibly important because it gets to the basic questions about the meaning of merit in the system, about the basis on which people would be hired, whether or not people who are viewed as poor performers could be fired without cause, or for that matter, whether anybody could be fired without cause. And so Biden has struck that down. The second thing is that he's clearly signaled a stronger interest in restoring the role of unions and representing public sector workers. And so that's been an important piece as well, including pushing back on some of the things that the Trump administration had done. And then finally, there's been an important focus on the role of science and experts. There are agencies in particular that have suffered pretty mightily in the last few years in terms of both a denigration of their role and a cutback in the number of personnel. You can think of everything from the State Department on the one side to the CDC on the other. And the Biden team in particular has really focused on the importance of trying to strengthen their roles, and especially in the case of state, to be beginning to build back the expertise that had leaked away. So in the first 100 days or so, that's a pretty substantial set of accomplishments already, signaling, I think, the direction in which the Biden team wants to go.
So to that end, you wrote about how the Biden administration should work from the bottom up to empower the federal civil service. How would he go about doing that?
And there's a tremendously important point here, I think, that one of the things that has happened, I think, in the last decade is a growing recognition of the importance of frontline workers. The fact that frontline workers are often the people who most interact with individual citizens. I've had some personally pretty remarkable experiences with people, for example, in the Social Security Administration lately, who went way, way, way out of their way, since they're not in the office themselves personally, to find ways of solving some questions and problems that I was trying to deal with. That was pretty remarkable customer service. And so that the ability of government to connect with citizens in many cases depends on the ability of frontline workers to be able to make that kind of connection, that interaction, that sense of service that goes along with it. You can look at the Transportation Security Administration, an agency that maybe next to the IRS we all love to hate, but they're responsible for keeping us safe as we get on airplanes. One of the things that we've learned, though, is that the performance of TSA agents at different airports is sometimes wildly different. That there are some places where the level of employee engagement and the level of customer satisfaction is very high, other places where it's mighty low. And so we now have increasing data to be able to understand which are which. And by understanding which practices are working best and which satisfy customers more while keeping us all safe, I mean, those are practices that we can pick up and use in airports across the country. And now we have data that makes it possible to be able to deal with that. So that combination of a focus on customer service on the one side, employee engagement on the other, and the effort of leaders to try to drive that all in accomplishing the agency's mission is, I think, the great avenue that lies ahead for us. And there's a lot of evidence that in a lot of cases, it's beginning to work pretty well.
We have a lot of data and we have a lot of information available on employee performance. So how would and how can the Biden administration focus on performance to sort of build and foster trust with the federal civil service?
I think a really big point here is that when we talk about performance in government, it's become increasingly clear to me that there are very different things we mean when we talk about it, or that different people mean when they use the term. There are those who talk about the ability of government to accomplish its mission. There are those who talk about the connection between government employees and their customers. There are those who talk about making it easier to try to fire poor performing government officials and make it therefore possible to clean out the dead wood, as people often say. And there's an effort to try to find ways of improving the employee assessment process. And so the fact that we have so many different kinds of ways of conceiving a performance sometimes drives us in lots of different directions. And it's never easy to try to row a boat with people pulling on the oars going in different ways. One of the things we've got to do is to begin all rowing in the same direction. And I think that the evidence really is, do we have poor performance? Absolutely. Should we find ways of making it easier to get people who are poor performers out of federal service? Yes. Is there evidence that the number of poor performers in government is significantly higher than in the private sector? The answer is no. I did another piece for GovExec back last year, and it turns out that the number of people who are involuntarily separated from government is about the same as similar kinds of industries in the private sector. So there just isn't evidence that the government is substantially worse at this. What we really need to do, and this is a fundamental opportunity for the Biden administration, maybe a fundamental imperative for the Biden administration, is to refocus the question of performance on understanding first what an agency's mission is, second, how best to try to drive it to successful results, and then ultimately trying to engage employees throughout the agency, but especially the ones that encounter citizens in ways to try to advance that mission. And I think it's a singular focus on what are we doing here, how well are we doing, how can we do it better, is the one thing that I think could both improve performance to deal with this problem that people mean different things by it, and in the end, satisfy citizens more about the government that they're getting in exchange for the money that they're paying.
Yeah, that certainly would help as far as the trust in the civil service. If the customers, such as it were, the citizens and the people who deal with government, can have more faith in that system, if it is that much better. So, government's made up as people, as the president said last week. So how can the administration sort of foster better hiring practices to bring in better people to get government with the right skills in place?
Yeah, that's such a great question, Ross. And because the fundamental problem here is that as you talk to people both around Washington, but also around the country, and even to students of mine who may be interested in public service, the one thing about which there's consensus on among just about everybody is that the federal hiring system is broken, that nobody likes USA jobs. People in agencies trying to hire talk about a post and pray kind of service where they write a job description, post it, and pray that they get somebody who's going to match their qualifications that they're looking for. People who are trying to apply are sick and tired of sending, in some cases, hundreds of applications in, only to have them either be ignored or to never get any kind of reply. It's a system that nobody really likes. But there's some things that the administration could do, I think, to try to help that. First is that USA jobs, I think we can all conclude, is pretty much broken, and that creating a better way of connecting the qualifications and skills needed in agencies to the workers who want to apply is something that's better. We need to radically improve the time to hire, which right now is about 3 times what it is in the private sector. That's something we can do better on, and it has to do with trying to focus that process more fundamentally on trying to get people in. We can create pooled systems of hiring, which we've experimented with, but there's no reason why if somebody's applying to be an accountant or a policy analyst, a management expert for, say, the Department of Energy, shouldn't be considered for a similar kind of position in NASA without having to start and create that pool all over again from scratch. Having a pool of qualified people would allow the entire system to work a whole lot more simply. And those are all fairly simple, he says, knowing full well that they're not super simple, but simple by comparison to some of the broader issues, which would include the possibility that we've really got to think about the changing nature of work, the fact that the federal government workforce in 2025 and 2030 is going to look radically different from what it is now. And we need to begin now to try to prepare for the workers that we need. We need to find a way to try to encourage younger workers for coming in, because the government right now has more workers over the age of 60 than under the age of 30, and that's not a good long-term plan. And same time, though, we have to reckon with the fact that a lot of younger workers just can't imagine working for government or for any organization for that matter for more than 5 years, 10 years in many cases, certainly not a whole career. And so that the idea of finding ways of bringing people in for short stints, maybe on 5-year appointments, that could create more flexibility in the civil service system, something that's going to be hard to get past, something maybe hard to get support from the unions on, but something that's going to be especially important in trying to match the workers that we need with a government that's transforming itself into a very different government for tomorrow. So there's some short-term things we can do, some harder short-term things that are going to require some real administrative heavy lift, and some more blue sky kinds of things that I think could put together with the others really create a radically different but radically better civil service system, and something that I'm hoping that as we think about the Public Service Recognition Week, say in 2030, we can stand back and say, look where we've come in the last decade. And that's what we have to be able to look forward to.
Hiring may be among these, but what do you think are the biggest challenges for the connection between agency management and rank and file feds? And I would also add, the citizens.
And the big issue, I think, is just understanding that there is a connection. And the two things we need to be alert to. First is that the level of trust in government, especially the level of trust in the federal government, is not all that great. But on the other hand, if you look at polls of citizens, there are very few programs that citizens want to do away with. So there's both problem and opportunity here. The problem is that citizens don't tend to think government works very well. The opportunity is that citizens actually want most of the programs that they're getting. And so finding a way to be able to draw that connection as the core is, I think, our greatest opportunity there. Along with that, I think, is a recognition on the part of people at the very top, and I mean political appointees who may not be there for more than 2 or 3 years, to understand that their job is not to come in and make big policy and then leave the details to somebody else, but their most important job is to engage their people in getting the mission of the agency accomplished. And so it's connecting that most fundamentally to the work that's being done that will drive better results to citizens. I think there are better data systems that we could use to try to understand how we can know whether that's actually happening. I think we need to shift our performance metrics, for example, in the best places to work, away from, well, why is NASA and Homeland Security so radically different? No matter what it is that Homeland Security does, it's never going to be NASA because its mission is different, its employees are different. Making those kind of comparisons just isn't very useful. What is useful, on the other hand, though, is if you can think about, for example, an airport where TSA works pretty well and another where customer satisfaction is not as high. How can a manager try to figure out how to determine what the good stuff is and do a lot more of that, figure out what the bad stuff is and do a lot less of that? And I think that the role of the people at the top of the agency is understanding that that's the way that they can drive success, by creating metrics that allow them to learn and to be able to speed up the learning curve so that citizens are more satisfied much more quickly. That, I think, is pretty exciting.
Yeah, hopefully the administration can sort of foment these kind of ways to connect and ways for better performance and better service to citizens. Dr. Kettl, thanks so much for being on the show with us.
It's so great to be with you as always, Ross.
Thanks for listening to GovExec Daily. Our show was produced by Adam Butler and hosted by me, Ross John Fortuné. We want to thank GovExec contributor Dr. Donald F. Kettl for joining the program. Our music is the song Signals by Catfish Dancing. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. You can email us any feedback at podcast@govexec.com or hit us up on Twitter @govexec. We'd love to hear from you. Now stay tuned for a message from our sponsor, Salesforce.
Hello and welcome. I'm Juliette Van Wagenen, editor of branded content for Government Executive Media Group's Studio 2G, and I'm sitting down today with Chris Radich, Vice President of Digital Strategy at Salesforce. Chris is going to share his insights into the growing world of cloud services, why agencies need to plan modernization efforts effectively in order to ensure they can get the most out of their investments, and how Salesforce can play a role in creating robust transformation strategies. Chris, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Let's get right into it. Why is it more important than ever that agencies look at modernizing their legacy IT systems?
Well, you look back in time and there was always this digital dilemma within government. There's a variety of reasons. I studied it in my previous role, wrote a report on the state of federal IT, but it feels different this time. It feels like COVID-19 has really been the number one catalyst that we've ever seen in terms of IT modernization, or even more broadly, digital transformation. And it's an exciting time to be an IT leader, to be a mission leader, because it's allowed for that change to happen more naturally. The challenge across government has always been some of the approvals, some of the compliance, maybe even bureaucracy. And COVID has changed the game from my perspective.
As citizens and employees are both looking for more digital experiences, where should agencies be focusing their energies?
When you think of digital experience, it's such a broad priority. And it is morphed into this human-centered design or customer experience priority. But you really have to narrow the aperture to become effective in driving results here. And the way I would describe it is you need to focus specifically on customer service and engagement, not just CX and human-centered design. And this includes projects that can be implemented quickly, such as contact centers, single front door portals, and digital engagement channels.
Great. And so how can Salesforce specifically help agencies to enable wholesale enterprise digital transformation and include, tools and services like those that you mentioned?
Well, our whole company's principle at Salesforce has always been to focus 100% of our energy around the customer and to build our digital transformations around that government customer. So whether it's a veteran or a farmer or a state or local resident, the customer is always front and center. And when you do that, you start to really identify it's all about improving services, integrating with legacy systems effectively, and providing ways to make data-driven decisions at all levels. And we're leaders in all three categories in terms of customer engagement center, integration platform, and analytics and BI.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. Chris, thank you for joining me, and thank you to everyone listening to our podcast. To learn more, be sure to check out the Salesforce Public Sector Transformation Summit on Tuesday, May 25th. You can register at publicsectorsummit.com/register.